I mentioned we have a guest joining us today. She's joined us in the show before. Her name is Katherine Kersten. She is a writer, an attorney, and a senior policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. And I've mentioned them before. This is based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The Center of the American Experiment is Minnesota's leading public policy organization. If you're a listener here in Texas, it's very similar to our Texas Public Policy Foundation. It's a leading conservative think tank. They research, produce papers. This one in Minneapolis and Minnesota's economy, education, healthcare, all sorts of other issues based on emphasizing free enterprise, limited government, personal responsibility. Katherine Kersten, senior policy fellow there, great writer, served as a Metro columnist for the Star Tribune, Minneapolis. She's written on cultural and policy issues, been widely published in Wall Street Journal, Weekly Standard, Christianity Today, many other places, appears on many radio and television shows locally and nationally. And Katherine Kersten, I believe we have her on the phone.
Hello there.
Hi, Katherine.
Thanks for inviting me. Good to be on the show.
I'm so glad you could join me today. And I just want to start right off with, jump into our topic. You wrote a piece in December of 2019, and I can't believe it's been this long until we got to talk about it, but you wrote a piece about the New York Times 1619 Project. And the caption was, New York Times 1619 Project Revisited. And you were critical of the New York Times 1619 Project. Let's just start with, can you just, my listeners probably know, but if you would say what the project is and why you were writing about and calling into question.
Certainly. Well, the 1619 Project involved about 30 essays and artistic productions in the New York Times Sunday magazine. The goal was to what they called reframe history, American history, with the idea being that our nation's true founding didn't take place in 1776, but 400 years before that, in 1619, when the first slaves, at least likely the people were slaves, perhaps indentured servants, came ashore at the Jamestown colony. So they're saying that this was the actual founding date of our nation, and that its founding ideals, I'm quoting here, were false when they were written, claiming also that nearly everything that has made America exceptional is a result of slavery, that it's got to be at the very center of who we are. So displacing 1776 and America as the land of freedom and opportunity with a narrative that we must look to 1619 and slavery as the essence of what this nation is about.
We've talked about this on this show before, and I have criticized it in many ways. But tell me, if you would, tell us your major reasons why you were rejecting what New York Times is trying to do with the 1619 Project.
Well, the point was, I think, to place the prestige of the New York Times behind this radical and false claim, and the Pulitzer Center on crisis reporting has taken what the New York Times has done and packaged it as a school curriculum with study guides, activities for teachers. They claim at this point that between 3,500 and 4,000 schools across America, school districts, I believe, have embraced this curriculum as telling the story of who we are as Americans. And of course, exactly the opposite is true. What makes us exceptional as a nation is not that we once allowed slavery. That was true almost everywhere throughout human history. It's that our founders launched an incredible experiment in democracy, in self-government, uniquely in the world. And this is what has led to people of all races flocking here and finding the road to prosperity here, regardless of race. That's the story the New York Times doesn't want our young people to know.
I could not agree more. One sentence you wrote, which I really, really liked, you wrote, in fact, the 1619 Project gets the truth exactly backward. America is exceptional not because it once allowed slavery, a universal, unquestioned practice throughout most of human history, but because its founders launched a great and unprecedented experiment in democratic self-governance. I mean, that is just, it's what the show hones in on all the time, the unique, extraordinary greatness of America. And the New York Times effort in the 1619 Project, it has a political mission to undermine people's basic love of America, reverence for the ideas of America. And then to spread it in the schools, I see it as so harmful to our fabric, our culture of our country. Do you agree?
Exactly, and as you say, I think the real aim is to convince people, as the New York Times Project said, that, quote, racism is in our nation's very DNA. That means it's impossible to change, right? It's unerasable, which means that we must turn all the institutions of our nation upside down, transform them in order to rid our nation of the racism that was allegedly baked in the beginning. It's a power grab. It's a rewriting of history in order to hand power to people like the editors of the New York Times, and they would tell us what our nation is going to become in the future.
Oh, I love that, and I love that power grab. I'm taking notes where I love that. It's just a big power grab. It actually also, if you get enough people believing that this is the nature of America, it justifies many, many government programs. It justifies reparations. It justifies long-term affirmative action, all sorts of left-wing policies. If you accept that this is a premise of America, then yeah, that's what you're going to think is valid. So it really enables very left-wing policies to be legitimized in the minds of Americans.
Well, and implicitly, it also justifies riots, right? We know that because after the riots that took place following the George Floyd incident here in Minneapolis, Charles Kessler of the Claremont Institute said that this, had bore some relation to the narrative put forward by the New York Times, and Nicole Hannah-Jones, who is the woman who conceived of this 1619 project, said it would be an honor to have these riots called the 1619 riots. If you don't get what you want and you're in an endemically racist nation, you may have to shake things up, right? And who cares about the fact that, for example, one of the best off groups in America happens to be Nigerian Americans who have a median income substantially higher than the median income of white Americans. These kinds of facts that prove that this is a nation of opportunity need to be erased and blotted out by people who are pushing this kind of ideology on our young people.
Oh, and it's so dangerous because, as you say, it's now being brought into the schools. And I think that if there hadn't been such major attention drawn to it in political circles and commentaries like yours, it may have made its way insidiously into schools and stayed there for a long time. And a lot of parents, I think, were not even aware the kids are being taught these things. But it's how you end up with
Correct.
people. Yeah, it's the craziest thing. Well, I want to turn to your organization, the Center of the American Experiment, ran an article talking about a different project, the 1776 Unites Project, which is a different message. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, this is the kind of thing our young people should be hearing. The 1776 Unite Project was launched by Bob Woodson, who is an African American who has opposed this kind of victim mongering for Black people for many decades now. And he's drawn together Black writers and historians, academics, public figures to pull together a curriculum that, in his words, uses a quote, authentic, inspiring stories from American history to celebrate Black excellence and reject victimhood culture. So 1776 Unites is putting out lesson plans, and these are all free and accessible online. They've now got high school lessons up on their website. They'll be adding new lessons every month and expanding into K-8 grades as well. But these are just wonderful stories that convey to young people what it takes, regardless of your race, to do well in America's free environment. So celebrating the principles of free enterprise and faith and family, integrity, hard work, personal responsibility through very inspiring stories of Black people, including in this piece you mentioned, highlighting two people who were either slaves or the children of slaves, who had just remarkable success because they used and lived by the principles that lead to success for all people, regardless of their color.
I love this. I have to say that I wish all the schools who have been entertaining the idea or have taken in the 1619 Project curricula would look at this and add this, or just get rid of the 1619 and just do this. Because the idea, among the many things I love about 1776 Unites, is it's Black writers, Black thinkers pulling this together, and they're sending a message of don't agree with the message of victimhood. That is not I think it's an insulting message to people of any, assign it to women or Black Americans or any other group, that your major identity, how you should think of yourself, is just a victim in America. It makes you so helpless and so diminishes the value of and uniqueness of each person. I love that project. And so
yes, that is so true. And you look at the recent exhibit that the Smithsonian in Washington did on whiteness, claiming that white norms, which are what American institutions are based on, they say, such as literally punctuality and politeness and hard work and that kind of, those are white norms. These are not habits and virtues that Black people allegedly can develop. I mean, what a demeaning and condescending and damaging way to portray people to themselves as unable to behave in civilized ways. How can this be seen as anti-racist?
Oh,
but in fact, it's precisely the opposite.
It's the craziest thing, yes, that punctuality or any human attribute belongs to a particular skin color, not another. It's offensive, especially offensive to people. These are qualities you need to succeed. And you're being told, well, because of your skin color, you don't have them, so I guess you're kind of out of luck, can't succeed. Okay, yeah, amazing. I also want to ask you, so President Trump recently issued an order that involves diminishing or getting rid of, actually, some of the trainings that were being done in federal agencies and coming from the federal government based on critical race theory. And so I wonder what your reaction was to that.
Well, he called critical race theory damaging and anti-American and inconsistent with the fundamental beliefs that underlie this country. And this is, I think, so very true. I mean, the idea there is that in a very simplistic, kind of one-dimensional view of how we live, is that people should be viewed as members of their racial groups first, and only secondarily as individual human beings. So people fall into one of two classes, according to critical race theory. They are either oppressors or they are the oppressed. And life is a power struggle between those groups. Now, it used to be that racism was considered to be defined as discrimination against people based on their immutable physical characteristics. But in this new racism, as conjured up by critical race theory, all of a sudden racism has become about systems and structures and implicit bias. And white people are born evil, right? They don't even know in many cases that they're racist according to this theory. And that's why the entire society has to be deconstructed. because white people sort of can't help themselves, according to this theory. It's absolutely toxic to American governmental agencies and in schools, and President Trump is saying it has no place in schools.
Oh, it's premise.
I'm sorry, in federal agencies, he's saying, and of course the same is true of public schools.
Yeah, I thought it was among the most brave moves, because in an election cycle where he is trying to work on bringing more of the black vote over to his side of the aisle, it would be easy to leave that alone, to say, well, we'll talk about that after the election. But he saw it for the insidious thing that it is. It is critical race theory is in itself racist. It is assigning,
yes,
yeah, in itself racist, and somehow it's racism that's okay with the critical race theory people, because as long as it's not people of color who are being victimized or characterized, then it's fine. And I'll tell you, there was an interesting thing. The Army, there's a woman writing about the things happening with critical race theory in the military. A Navy captain, I don't know if you even saw this story, Navy Captain Mahler announced a book club for Second Fleet sailors, naming the book Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility as its first selection. There's also a military academy course titled Politics, Race, Gender, Sexuality, Critical Race Theory. I mean, the point is, all of this theory is being infused into, we mentioned, in schools and public, any contractors related to the federal government. But even the military, they're using racist, white privileged materials as training in the military. I mean, you can't imagine a more divisive consequence or impact than that.
This is extremely dangerous. I couldn't agree more. And it is definitely moving ahead in our service academies. And my understanding is at West Point, there a group of something like 9 students have come forward claiming. One, I believe, is a young black woman who was, let's say, the top cadet or at the top of her class. Nevertheless, claiming, my understanding is that West Point is a racist educational institution. I don't know how those two things work together, but calling for the kinds of changes there that many colleges are beginning to put in place in their own curricula and their own selection of faculty members, that kind of thing.
Okay, Katherine, I do want to turn to our discussion about women, because I think the same way that kind of leftist ideology functions by creating racial groups as victim categories, told their victims, the same way the 1619 Project tries to tell Black Americans that your very identity is as a victim. The same thing happens with women. But one more thing on race. I thought this was so interesting. In universities now, there was discussion about the idea that it's not enough if you go to university and you happen to be Caucasian and you say you're not racist. It's not okay just to say I'm not racist.
Right.
You have to say you are anti-racist, and if you won't say you're anti-racist, then you are racist. I mean, you're not allowed just to say I'm not involved in racism. I don't agree with it. You have to join the anti-racist cause. Have you read about this?
Yes, absolutely. Silence is violence. I read just yesterday that at Northwestern Law School, 3 individuals, and it may be that all of them were professors, were involved in some kind of racist or racially focused event there, and they said, "My name is so and so, and I am a racist." I mean, kind of the Alcoholics Anonymous, confessing your racism. If you deny that you're a racist, that nothing could prove more that you are a racist, according to this way of thinking. I mean, there's no way out, right? It's like the Red Guard Cultural Revolution struggle sessions where people used to be made, especially academics, to sit with dunce caps on their heads and confess their sins to a jeering crowd. I mean, this is deeply, deeply troubling stuff to see in our nation.
Oh, it really is. And just the thought control it represents, because it seems as though there are, in many aspects of American life, many arenas of American life, you don't have intelligent discussion, exchange of ideas, listening to each other. You have categories, and you are told by the political correctness isn't even a good enough term anymore. It's too quaint or soft. It is a propagandizing that says you're going to agree with our agenda on this item, and you're going to agree with the 1619 Project that says America is racist, and you're going to agree that white privilege exists and you are guilty of it, or you have no voice at all.
Yes, and you may lose your job. You know, you will lose your reputation. It is astounding to me that the American public it is basically letting this go by without raising their voice and saying not in America.
Yeah, not on my watch. I couldn't agree more. Okay, so now I want to turn. You're such a great thinker and writer, and I want to turn to talking all these same arguments about whether you treat groups of people based in our society as victims, or you, like the 1619 Project does, like law leftism does, or do you treat people with respect? And it is true, historically, there probably has not been sufficient coverage in our country, in our academia, of these stories of very heroic, successful, noble Americans who, throughout our history, who are black. The idea we're going to bring more of those stories to the fore is great. Same with women. We may have had too much focus on men as in our history studies, and to have more of awareness of women and their place in society. But the same things are happening with respect to women. The argument of the left is women are victims, and so let us sign up with us, and we'll rescue you. And you've talked a lot about this idea, you've written about the idea that the better idea of feminism is standing up for women, not because we're victims and weak, but because we're actually capable, and that is the way feminism should think. You had a false feminism article a while ago now, last year. But talk a little bit about how you see the parallels between in race and then gender, that in responding about how we treat.
Of course. Yeah, you're exactly right. And again, it falls into the kind of culturally Marxist narrative that society is divided between oppressors and the oppressed. You just move from black and white into male and female. And by definition, women are inherently victims. Life is a power struggle between men and women, and men are oppressors. And I, when all of this began to bubble up, at least in my life, when I was, 25 or 30 years old, Gloria Steinem was writing about this. Kate Millett and others. Gloria Steinem was writing that women were psychic colonies of men. They were. Susan Faludi had a best-selling book. She was writing that women were misled by the patriarchy. It was there whispering into their ears, and they would kind of march off like zombies. Another basically vision that came from Betty Friedan, one of the founding mothers of feminism. Women as weak, bent reeds who were rolled over by the patriarchy contrary to their own interests. Well, I thought about my grandmothers. My grandmothers were married before women could even vote in 1917. They were incredibly strong women. One raised 5 children basically alone, went off and drove across the country, starting her own little business. I mean, just astonishingly strong individuals who knew who they were. They weren't confused by the patriarchy. They couldn't even vote. And today, my gosh, look at the opportunities we have. We should be full of gratitude instead of counting up our little resentments. That's a childish kind of thing to do. We're always looking to blame somebody else for our own failings, or we don't have what we want. Life is complex. We don't get everything that we want, and life isn't fair. And you basically just grab your first principles and try to live your life by those principles with gratitude for all the blessings we have in this great nation.
Could not agree more. And actually, in terms of feminism, I'd be the first one to say I'm thrilled that we had in our country Title VII that came along that said can't discriminate in employment. And we have the same protections with respect to education. You can't discriminate against women or people based on race, sex, national origin in hiring and promotions, in admission to academia, in the highest levels of professionalism. We have a cultural norm in America now that you just don't discriminate. So the idea, there may be individual instances where discrimination occurs, and I'm all with women speaking up if they think they actually were. Yeah, it's not saying you shouldn't, that we don't stand up for equality. We just have to be honest about where we really are as a country in terms of equality.
That's right. And women shouldn't be expected to make the same choices that men do in every circumstance, or else we assume there's discrimination. If more women want to be child care workers than over-the-road truck drivers, we don't assume that the patriarchy is whispering in their ear that they're somehow being discriminated against. I think it's that jumping to conclusions when there are different outcomes, claiming that there's kind of malevolent discrimination at work there, rather than the fact that there may be differences overall in the way that the sexes choose to spend their lives or portions of their lives, and not to get all bent out of shape about that, but to see it as freedom.
Yep. Okay, Katherine, I want to ask you that because you're in Minneapolis. It's such a great opportunity to be able to talk with you today. So we've covered in this show many times, of course, the riots in Portland, the violence throughout our cities, the violence in Minneapolis, all springing from the George Floyd incident. And Minneapolis was one of the first places to at least put in the ballot and talk about defunding police, which I don't know if you happen to see, there was a member of the Black Caucus, or Congressional Black Caucus in Washington, who said, defund the police is about the dumbest slogan I've ever heard for the Democrat Party. But back to Minneapolis. First of all, what is the situation on the ground right now in Minneapolis, in the downtown area? Is it peaceful now or not? And then what do you think is the reaction of people in Minneapolis to this move to defund police?
Well, in terms of the scene in Minneapolis, it is peaceful for now. There are very few people downtown going to work, shopping, etc. So lots of and the housing market has shifted quickly and now reflects the fact that people are hesitant to move downtown as a result of that. But the crime rate for violent crimes, the number of shootings, homicides, the last time I checked, the number of shootings were something like double what they were last year at this time. And homicide rates, and this is almost entirely black on black incidents, has really gone through the roof. So people are very hesitant to go downtown. And recently, aside from the initial riots where we had over 1,500 businesses that were fired, that is the subject of arson. They were looted, they were destroyed in other ways. We had just, what was it, maybe a month ago or so now, there was a rumor here that police had shot a black man. It turned out that this man, who was engaged in some kind of crime, I've forgotten what, killed himself. He committed suicide. Nevertheless, there was a huge riot. More businesses were trashed. Regularly in some parts of the city, there are autonomous zones. This so-called autonomous zone where George Floyd died, where police, it's all blocked off by the residents, or supposedly. Police are very hesitant to go in there. It's really crazy. So that has been very, very concerning.
Wow. So I think in Minneapolis, one of the places where they talk about defund the police and has the city.
Oh yes, sorry, you asked about that.
No, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. So our city council, yes, voted overwhelmingly to defund the police. Literally to end our police force. It turns out they couldn't do that because the city charter doesn't allow it. But what they basically wanted to do was in every possible instance, send in social workers rather than trained law enforcement agents in situations that have some kind of dangerous potential. And of course, many of the African Americans who live in the city are saying, "Are you kidding me? Please, look what's happening in my neighborhood. Don't do this." But it's been fascinating to watch. Now, they are not going to be able to push forward with that at this point because there was a charter commission which indicated that this cannot go on the ballot. It would have to go on the ballot in November, and it won't be going on the ballot this election cycle. But this remains the underlying desire of our city council.
I find that simply mind-blowing. Honestly, I think, Katherine, if you asked Americans even a year ago, can you imagine in America we're going to get to a place a year from now where major cities are going to vote to defund their police, you would have laughed. You would have said, that's absurd. Everyone knows we need police. Of course that's not going to happen. So much has happened in 2020 that has just turned America on its head. So much. So what is your sense, if you happen to know of the popularity of support for how the police handled the riots in Minneapolis? I mean, because to me, I tell you, I'm becoming more law and order. I want them shut down. I want law and order more than I want to tolerate the latest riot. But what's your sense of whether the police the public approves of how the police are handling the riots and how public officials are handling the riots?
Well, interestingly, and of course that's a big difference between public officials and the police, because both the mayor of Minneapolis and the governor of Minnesota waited to bring in the National Guard until the rioters had burned down the 3rd Precinct police station, and all hell broke loose. Finally, they brought in the National Guard. I think that was on the 4th day of these terrible riots, which harmed disproportionately businesses owned by minority groups and immigrants. So I think there's been very strong opposition to the fact that these officials let this get out of hand. It did not support the police. But our Center of the American Experiment, actually did a poll on this very recently. And I'm just reading from our what we wrote about this. Political observers are hard-pressed to recall a previous time when personal safety occupied the top concern for Minnesotans statewide going into a presidential election. It says, by wide margins in our poll, Minnesotans expressed irritation that rioters, looters, and arsonists have received inadequate punishment for their behavior. They rebuke local elected officials for their powerlessness to stop these riots from doing what they did to the Twin Cities. And it was 53% of Minnesotans overall said public safety is now the most important priority. That number was 68% among Republican respondents, 64% among independents, but only 33% among Democrats. So that shows an interesting gulf there.
That is an amazing gulf. Who answers a poll like that in the context of facts on the ground in Minneapolis says, no, I'm not so worried about public safety. Okay, I can't even go there. Katherine Kersten, I think I ran over the time that we agreed. I want to thank you for joining me. And actually, if you would tell our listeners how to find your center online, because your website is fabulous, lots of great stuff. So how they find you?
Sure, it's www.americanexperiment.org, and yes, I think you'll really like the array of fascinating information, daily posts, that kind of thing we have, as well as all of our reports and events.
I love it. Katherine Kersten, thank you so much for taking time to join me today. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you. Okay, folks, I'm going to wrap up one other thing on this topic, and then I have the fastest closing, but I was thinking about, I didn't want to honor her time, but I was thinking about Amy Coney Barrett, who is obviously President Trump's nominee to serve in the Supreme Court. And what a contrast between, conservative feminism, if that's to be a term, and radical leftist feminism. Radical leftist feminism, today's alleged left-wing feminism, is all about telling people you're victims, you are helpless, you can't possibly function without the government, big government programs, you can't handle life without the government, you need the government creating new programs and paying you more things and providing for your needs. And so that's how the left thinks feminism is. And I love about the idea, I love the parallel between, how left-wing 1619 Project talks to Black Americans as though they are victims and America is a terribly racist place, and left-wing on the subject of women talks to women as though America is a terribly unfair place and a sexist place and you're never going to be treated fairly and you need the left to help you. And the really right idea in both groups for Black Americans are things more like the 1776 Unites Project, the Brexit Project, the Black and Latina exit from the Democrat Party. Messages of politics that celebrate the individual, our strengths, our abilities, our opportunities, the greatness of America. That is the message of the conservative side to Black Americans. It's the message of the conservative side to women. Do not accept your plight in life is whatever the left tells you it is. Accept instead that you have place, opportunity, and rights in this country. The left is thriving on driving America and the picture of America and the minds of Americans into the gutter. Conservatives are saying, no, this is a great country. It's a great country for everyone, for Black Americans, for women, for people of every race, ethnicity, national origin. Celebrate the greatness of America. So I want to get to Amy Coney Barrett, who has been nominated to serve in the Supreme Court. I was just thinking what an example she is. She is a, widely recognized as the smartest person in the room everywhere she goes. She's a law professor at Notre Dame, no small feat. She's a federal circuit court judge, widely recognized for her brilliant legal analysis. She has people who are her peers from her teaching at Notre Dame, from her time on the bench, even leftists, even Democrats saying she's brilliant, she's fair, she's wonderful. She's happily married. She is married to her husband, and she have 5 children, and they adopted 2 more from Haiti. No, they have 5 or 6 children. I think they have 7 total children, 5 of their own, 2 more they adopted. So she is a woman who celebrates life, who believes in the goodness of life, who is happily married, celebrates traditional marriage, and still successful, and still achieving, and still moving forward. And everything about Amy Coney Barrett puts the lie to what the left says is true about women in America. The left thrives on creating victimhood for Black Americans, for women, for everybody else. And Amy Coney Barrett is example A, exhibit 1, that the left is wrong about what they say about America, that women who will strive and achieve and dream, and they can still be happily married, they can still be the parent, they still have children, they can still have family, and they can succeed. America is a place of opportunity, and it's just astonishing to me the left makes so much headway trying to claim that America is a place that just crushes women's rights and crushes the rights of anyone and people of color. The left lies to America on issue after issue after issue.